Hey everyone, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where I talk to writers of all backgrounds, and we have a great conversation, and then we make up a short story together. And I was excited for today's guest because it's one of those more rare occasions that I get a chance to talk to somebody who predominantly writes nonfiction. So today I spoke to Barb Webb, who is a sustainable living expert, and she lives in very rural Appalachian Kentucky. And she has a few books out. Her most recent book is called Getting Baked: Everything You Need to Know About Hemp, CBD, and Medicinal Gardening. So very much a how-to book. And it was great talking to her because I'm always interested to see how, you know, the people who write nonfiction always impress me because they you know, you can't just make things up like us novelists can. You have to be factual, and you have to do your research, and you have to be able to verify your research. But most of all, you still have to be able to write well. You still have to tell a story. You still have to convey a message. So I'm always impressed by people who have a deeply rooted love to the extent they're an expert in something, and then can also write well about it. And so that has been Barb's journey. And so we had a great conversation, and at the end we made up a quirky little story based on a Harlan Coben book. So hope you enjoy. This is my conversation with Barb Webb.
Hi.
All good. How are you?
Great. It snowed today, which is really bizarre, but
You're in Kentucky.
yes.
And snow in Kentucky is bizarre.
This time of year.
Yeah. How much did it snow?
Unexpected. We probably only got about a half a day. It's gone now. I mean, it was here this morning, gone this afternoon.
So you're in Appalachian Kentucky. When you look outside, what kind of scenery do you have? Describe Appalachian Kentucky to me.
Oh, Appalachian Kentucky is absolutely astounding.
I mean, I've heard,
if you've ever been in the mountain region at all, anywhere in the United States, fairly similar landscape, very green, very lush, very mountainous. We actually have moved, though, recently to a different farm, which is more outside of Louisville. So we're not quite, we're in the bluegrass belt, but not as near to the mountains as I'd like to be.
A little bit more urban you are.
Yeah. Just a smidge.
Well, now you can go to the races easier and all that kind of stuff. But you prefer being kind of out in the mountains and kind of not next door neighbors on top of you and that kind of a thing.
I do. And we're still, that way. We have a 15-acre farm. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, still quite spacious.
Yeah,
not as big as our last one, but
15 acres.
Definitely prefer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, I imagine 15 acres is a little bit more affordable in Kentucky than say California or Colorado, where I am even. So
very much so.
Yeah, great. So tell me, I've talked to a couple nonfiction writers. Not a lot. And it's interesting because, as I kind of dive into the background of why people wanted to write, it takes a little bit of a different angle, right? When you're talking about nonfiction. But that being said, there still exists kind of, you have to be able to write to do what you do. You can't just be like, well, I'm just interested in X, Y, and Z, and the writing comes easy. You still have to have that talent to communicate. And honestly, yeah, it just sounds so impossible to me to write nonfiction. But as you were growing up, did you have a sense of and I know you write some short fiction as well. Did you have a sense of I really like the act of writing? I like the act of communicating, on paper, or did that come much later?
Oh, absolutely. So God bless my brother. He taught me how to read when I was 4.
Oh, okay.
So
your brother taught you to read.
He did, yeah. Very cool. Because he was older than me. I had all older siblings, but
Yeah.
my brother and I were closest in age. Taught me to read before I even went to kindergarten, and so it started writing as far back as I remember, like early on in first and second grade. Poetry.
Okay.
Which is pretty significant for a kid that age. That's sort of the thing that comes out. My first short story I wrote when I was like in third or fourth grade.
And was this part of school, or that you just wanted to do the poetry and you wanted to do the short story?
Just wanted to do it. I was certainly encouraged in school. I had teachers that recognized, I think, early on that I was totally into literacy and wanting a voracious reader. And so they really encouraged that development.
What kind of stuff were you reading when you were younger? Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I remember some of my most influential books, of course, like To Kill a Mockingbird.
Sure.
That's a good one. But The Sins of Rachel Ellis, which is a very bizarre kind of book about Merlin in the
Oh, your audio cut out. I think you hit mute.
Hang on.
So you're telling me about Merlin. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Am I back?
Now you're back.
I can't hear me, but you can. All right.
Yeah, that's okay. So you're reading about Merlin, you were saying. Yeah,
this obscure book called The Sins of Rachel Ellis. I think I was in third grade, which was an inappropriate book for a third grader, but it was a little bit risque, a little sexual content in there.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I read, I spent my entire childhood at the library. I used to participate in the book things. I think one summer I read 654 books. So it was.
Oh my God.
Yeah, everything.
Now, was that unusual for your family, or did you come from a family of readers?
No, I didn't. So it was very unusual, and no one knew what to do with it. And my father early on, writers make no money, don't even think about.
That's not true at all.
Now I know he was right.
Yeah.
Back then, like, oh, you crazy generation, you're just out of touch.
Well, it's funny because the business of writing is a topic that I talk about a lot with my guests, and who all have different stories about it, right? And what's people, if you want, what I found, the thread is, if you want to write, if that's something that's in your blood, whatever it is you want to write, you will typically find a way to do that without saying, okay, this is going to sustain me as my, so as you see so many journalists who, write fiction as well, but they like to write. So they go into journalism, or nonfiction authors. So, but yeah, very few people I know sustain themselves wholly and completely, and their whole family, on income from books, for sure. So your parents then obviously saw, so you're really standing out, in like you said, in literacy. And was there, and you said you had some encouragement from your teachers, but were you also getting that from your family, aside from your dad saying, don't go into writing, but like, well, you're very creative, and how should you channel that? Was there a push, or was it like, nah, you should be an accountant?
Yeah, absolutely. So, not to bash my family, because I have a wonderful family. They didn't know what to do with me.
Yeah.
It was an anomaly.
What did your parents do growing up? Like, what was their,
my dad was a bricklayer.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a bricklayer for the state of Chicago. So, blue collar. My mom didn't work until I was a teenager, and then she was a receptionist. So she was a stay-at-home mom.
So they had the perspective of practical application, right? Like,
yes,
there's demand for people to lay bricks. I don't know if there's demand for people to write, stories all the time and make money from it. So.
Exactly. And, my father had grown up during the Depression,
sure.
Waning off that era, and my grandparents had, so they had that mentality. Yes, very much. Everything was, I got a lot of sustainability from them, though, which was really cool, because they were the whole initial reuse, reduce, recycle, make hamburger helper society.
Right.
where you make something out of nothing. So that was really cool background. But when it came to any creative or artistic pursuits, yeah, that's so funny you say that, because I went to college to become an accountant initially, because that was.
Well, there's some very creative accountants, don't get me wrong. Most of them are in jail.
I was going to make money that way. I was either going to get a, kind of secretarial career, or I was going to get married. That was sort of the traditional family I was brought up in. And
was that also kind of the environment, like the culture of where you were living was kind of, that's what you were kind of witnessing? Or those kind of options?
I lived in a very impoverished to lower middle class neighborhood, so very practical, hardworking people. So that's you work for everything that you've got. You use everything that you have to the best of your ability.
Yeah. And where did you end up going to college?
I didn't. I dropped out the first year.
Yeah. So. Accounting can do that to you. It didn't stir your passions.
Who would have thought? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? And odd time in my life, of course, because I was so artistic and creative, and some of my teachers had encouraged that, but nobody else did. I didn't know where to channel all this.
Yeah.
So I got into some kind of rebellious teenage years there, and college, right at that 18-19 cusp, when you're channeling into drugs and other things, to sort of figure all this out. It wasn't a good time. So I did wind up going back to college in my 40s. Actually, I graduated when I was 41.
Okay.
And I did that from more of a practical standpoint. I had already established my writing career, so I didn't need a degree in journalism. But it was kind of, I had young kids, and if I'm going to ever go back into the traditional workforce, I should have this piece of paper.
Right. All right. Well, so take me back to what you say wasn't fun, but actually what sounds like fun was the the drugging, partying, half college years. So you decide accounting's not for you, and you get out, and you've got creativity to burn and no outlet for it. What's the plan? Like, was there a plan when you dropped out, or was it just like, I can't take this anymore, it's not my life, I'll drop out and hopefully I'll figure it out?
Yeah, pretty much. That was no plan.
Yeah.
Just wing it, because I'm 19 and I know everything. And the crowd I was running with, not so great. Well, so funny enough, boom, I wound up pregnant. That changed my life.
So where were you living at the time?
South side of Chicago.
Okay.
So not necessarily the best neighborhood either.
Yeah.
And not the best choices I made when I was younger. However, it made me who I am today. So that's,
sure. Well, of course.
That.
So you're a young mother, and then what?
So I'm a young mom, and I'm a single mom, and I have to support my kid. So everything went on hold. And at that point, all of that lovely responsibility kicked in that my parents were trying to instill.
Right. Oh, this is what you mean by like paying bills and stuff.
Yeah. Wow. I got to put diapers on this kid. I got to feed this kid. I got to find housing that's appropriate and people aren't shooting in my window every other day.
And if you end up working, you got to find care for your kid, and that's super expensive.
Again, luckily I had a great supportive family in that respect. So my mom, started to take care while I went and found a job. And at that point, I'm 52, so almost. At that point, we didn't have technology. So we're in a different world at this point.
Yeah, you and I are about the same age, right?
Okay, yeah. So right at this point in my life, in that juncture, technology becomes a thing. And for some reason, I had a brain for it, and I actually had a passion for it, and I liked it, and I enjoyed it. I think because there was so much newness and creativity to that field,
right? And
no one else understood it, so you were like kind of a giant among men when you did,
right?
And I went into that field and rapidly rose ranks into actually building infrastructures within towns. And so again, supporting my child in the process. And then I began writing technical curriculum because I still wanted to write. I was still writing a lot of poetry, short stories. That was my creative outlet, just like some people paint or some people crochet. I wrote.
And were you doing anything with those stories, or that was just kind of to a pressure relief valve for you?
At first, it was a pressure relief valve, and then people started buying them. I don't know if you remember the true romances. Those were real big at the time. I sold a buttload of stories to them. So that was kind of cool. And then that was the first spark of, wow, I might actually be able to make money from my writing.
Yeah.
And that led me actually into technical writing. Like, I understood technology and software so well, I started writing curriculum for software manuals. And then I started working with companies who were developing their own curriculum, like Best Buy. I wound up working for that company for a long time, actually developing all their curriculum materials for their employees.
And that's interesting, right? Because when you think about, somebody who writes technical curriculum, they're like, okay, well, you just have to write dry and boring. But the reality of it is if you know how to storytell, you know how to edit, you know how to communicate and get across the point that you're trying to make, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction. And there's a vast difference between people who are able to communicate, something yes. difficult in a concise and pithy and understandable manner. And having that background probably was vastly helpful, not only for you, but for anyone who ended up reading those manuals, right?
I think so. And I think that's why I got hired. That's why I was popular. People, I kept throwing money at me in promotions and work, which was, great because I'm raising a child. But
right.
Yes, because I was able, and it's so important, I think, in nonfiction, and most people don't understand what you're saying, is there's a lot of creative writing involved. You do have to communicate the message. It's not just how do you, hit this key, but how do you actually get the person who is reading this to be engaged, to understand not only not only that they're hitting this key, but why.
Right.
So why is it important that you know this information?
Right.
And you have to be able to communicate that in an anecdotal way, in a creative way, in a way that makes sense to them and gets them engaged within that.
Right. And almost at a lowest common denominator kind of a level, right? You don't want to exclude, because various different types of people are going to be looking at that. And that's a little bit true with fiction as well. You want to be as accessible as possible while not, diluting the message, I guess. So you did that for a while, and you're writing on the side. So a long while. But eventually you got to, the topic of sustainability. Mm-hmm. What was the kind of the genesis of all that?
So that's interesting. I don't know. I'm not interesting, but some facets of my life are, I guess. How do you make that huge leap, Barb? Again, writing curriculum, I was connected with companies like Logical Operations and McGraw-Hill, and I was really in tune with technology. And so I not only wrote like Microsoft manuals, I wrote like marketing materials for the marketing department of Best Buy to get people to do their jobs better and to use the marketing software. And I even developed board games for them to understand the flow and the process of how all of this worked.
So just to interrupt real quickly, so something like that, is that something Best Buy says, we want to create a board game to make this easier to understand, or was that coming from you?
That was coming from me.
Oh, so that's great.
It worked. Yeah,
right.
It worked,
right,
and they loved it, and they used it in their classrooms. And so I still had that piece, and I realized how many women didn't. And how many moms would benefit. Now, at this point, the internet, the World Wide Web is a huge thing. We're not just typing into DOS.
Right.
We actually have an interface.
Regular people are now accessing information.
Regular people from all around the world are coming online, and they're finding even the simplest thing like coupons, right? So there was all this cool information and stuff that I knew other moms would benefit from. So that was actually my first book. My first nonfiction book was for McGraw-Hill. I realized technology where moms needed to know this, and I wrote, the guide for moms earning on the internet and being a stay-at-home mom and still being able to make some money and budget better for your family, which again goes back to my background in having that type of family. So I had that knowledge coming in too. And
right.
was able to connect all the dots.
And the technology piece is huge because we're, like you said, we're talking about, relatively still the infancy of the internet, in which you were not only as a woman, but as a person, one of probably the early adopters who has that leg up and understands the technology and understands how to communicate, how to utilize it to whatever end that you're describing. There was probably a real need for that and a real lack of expertise of people able to provide that. So and as you communicating to moms, I mean, that had to be one of the earliest kind of versions of that, I would think.
It was. I was actually the first book on the market. And for all the authors that are listening, I was rejected 56 times. That book.
It's a common theme.
Even by McGraw-Hill, which is so funny, because they eventually picked it up. Luck and timing. The right person picked it up and saw my vision and said, "Whoa, yeah, like you said, this is much needed material and nobody else is writing it."
So and clarify for me, in the world of nonfiction, are you going to market or are you going to potential publishers with a proposal rather than the completed work? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay.
So I had written the first chapter and the proposal. And I put it out there myself a few times, and then I finally secured an agent, and that agent put it out there about 50 times. And again, McGraw-Hill had rejected it early on, and then picked it up in the end. So it's an animal of a process, isn't it? That was eye-opener.
Yeah, but it's and I think it's great for people to hear that. It's universal. It's a universal issue. I mean, sure, there are no small lack of people who have tremendous success right out of the gate. But, my story is similar too. I wrote something and fiction, it's a little bit different where you have to have, here's the completed manuscript.
Right.
I was able to get an agent with my first manuscript after about 75 agent rejections. But then, and then who you shop to in fiction is usually a smaller subset, right? So it was about 15 to 20. But my first 3 books didn't sell. So it was like, a year-long process of rejection while I was like furiously writing another book because I lived in fear of my agent dumping me. Because as you know, agents don't make any money until you sell your book or they sell your book. So the McGraw-Hill took it and then you had to write it.
Right.
And what was that? Was that when you went to establish that, was that how difficult was writing that compared to your expectations?
So, once it's sold, obviously that was really cool. And, writing. So I had been writing curriculum already. So that's I'm not.
You knew the structure and
new to writing a nonfiction book. So I did. I had a really great understanding of structure. Again, I'm an avid reader, so that's sort of everybody always says, well, what's one of the first things that you recommend? I read a lot.
Yeah.
Because the more you read, the more you absorb, and that structure just becomes inherent. So that process was probably my most difficult nonfiction book to write because it's the first. Yeah. But still wasn't that difficult because I had a great understanding of structure. I had a great understanding of how a chapter should begin and end. That whole stating your thesis, understanding the why and then giving the how. So I really, and then sequentially putting the chapters in a way that they made sense. Right. So really had that.
As you're doing all this, I mean, so you've got an agent, you got a publishing deal. So those are substantial steps that most people never get to, right? Even the agent part is a step that most people never get to because the odds are so long. Are you in your mind at what point, or if you ever get there in your mind, are you saying, okay, this is maybe my life now. Maybe this is the direction I'm going to go. I'm going to move away from working for a company to write their info. I'm going to start doing this on my own? Or were you still clinging on, say, oh, this is cool that I'm doing this, but it's just this side thing?
Right. So that's a good question. That's where we jump to the sustainable living. This is all happening kind of simultaneously.
Okay.
So at this point, I've written this book. You have this expectation for when you're a kid, right? Oh, I'm a published author now. That's going to make life wonderful. And, the royalties are going to come in and I'm going to write the next book and everything's going to be cool. And my agent didn't like any of my next ideas. So I'm like, okay. And I kept throwing ideas, and nothing stuck. And I'm like, whoa, like this completely did not meet my expectations. I'm thinking I'm, just moving on and whoa, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to be an author. Maybe this is sort of an anomaly, but I really want to write. I enjoyed this process so much. I know that I want to go into this mainstream thing. At the same time, again, the internet's so prevalent in my life as a person working in technology.
Right.
And kind of this weird thing happened, I think, in the technology realm at that time that a lot of people didn't understand. So I got on Twitter right away, which was why I still have a huge following because I was a very early adopter of that. And what we started talking about was tech, but what we wound up talking about was the earth and the world and the greater good. And so it's kind of this weird thing that it seemed like a lot of tech people moved into sustainable living and what can we do for the environment and how can we use technology to better the world?
Right.
And that really opened my eyes and sort of connected back in earlier days. I was really interested in water conservation and Greenpeace and everything that was going on with these organizations. So it all made sense to me, the We Are the World, kind of vibe that was going on at the time. And so what did I do? I'm like, oh, I'm going to conserve the land. I went and bought a 117-acre farm.
So when you came out with that first book, were you still in Chicago at that time?
No, I was in Minnesota.
Okay.
So I had moved. I was working for Best Buy headquarters in Minnesota.
Okay. So I see.
Yeah, it was now.
So the farm was where?
Was in Minnesota, in Montgomery, Minnesota.
Still a single mom at this time?
I had remarried.
Okay.
Right before that. Yep. So I'm not. It was a little more feasible with two people.
Yeah, right.
But I knew nothing. Like I knew nothing about bees or how to plant a garden or raising pigs or chickens or any of this stuff that I wanted to do. But a researcher by nature, I went and learned it. I read every book that I could.
Sure.
I talked to every farmer that I could. I by osmosis became an expert on raising chickens and gardening and herbal gardening in particular, which is a passion of mine. And so that just became part of my shtick. So I'm online already. I'm one of the first people to actually have a journal, what we called it back then, which is now a blog.
Right.
We called it online journaling back in the day.
Right.
Because McGraw-Hill had said, hey, your readers have questions for you. We're getting some emails. Why don't you start an online journal? Okay. So I did. And then I started putting supplemental information out there. So I'm putting supplemental information. I'm writing daily in this journal about different things moms can do on the internet. But then I start going through this sort of global awakening and I start writing that too. And so that's how I made the transitional leap from technology to being fully invested in sustainable living and moving out of that arena. I continued to work for many years. I sort of put the author thing on hold at that point.
Sure.
My agent didn't like anything. She finally dropped me. She's like, well, you're just not going to produce another book.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
There are lots of other agents out there.
Right. Well, I'm busy. I'm raising a kid. I'm working full time. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm still a published author. I met a lifetime goal.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, chalk one.
Right. Right.
All right. Move on. There was about a 10-year gap. I did do some short story writing and just kept writing as a hobby and a passion.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until 10 years later I revisited the book market.
And again, with nonfiction and sustainable living, and there must have been probably something in your mind, even way back when you bought the farm, saying like, oh, if I figure this out, like I did with my first book, I'll have information to impart. And your natural outlet is obviously, a book. So, eventually you came out with Getting Laid, right?
Yes.
That was the name of the book. Now, was that your idea or was that your publisher's idea?
So, throughout this, I have a blog now, and this blog becomes a major part of my income.
Oh, which is rare, right? How many people can say blogs are a major part of their income?
Right?
That's fantastic.
Thank you. It was a novelty, and it was, and all of a sudden all these companies wanted to work with me in a different multifaceted way. Again, I was one of the first mom bloggers out there.
Yeah.
Which is a monster of an industry now. But back then there were very few of us. So I was an industry leader in that aspect and got a lot of work. And that became a major significant chunk of my time and my income. And here I'm going to have another child. And I'm like, well, okay, maybe writing can be my thing in a different capacity than I ever thought about online. And I started writing for other companies as well. And then decided to have another child. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try and make the leap and stay home. And I've done that ever since, which is great. I mean, I was
That's
lucky.
Fantastic.
Yeah, luck and timing had a lot to do with it. Just kind of being ahead of the trend, I think. For whatever reason, again, luck and timing. I just had the thoughts at the right time, got in at the right time, was early on. So I made a living out of that. And that eventually, yes, involved too, as people are coming to me as an expert on the subject in real life and online, the next evolution is how do I put this in print?
Right.
So that it has a broader audience.
And I think you kind of nailed it there a little bit of the idea. And this is pretty universal with writing as well, is that you were, either ahead of the curve or, at the beginning arc of the curve rather than chasing, right? So that's the advice you hear so often is to don't chase trends, because by the time, we all know as authors how long it actually takes not only to write the book, but if you happen to sell it, when it comes out, you're lucky to even have that trend still be a thing. so to chase it is foolish, and a lot of people do that, especially in fiction. And it's just like, I'm going to write the next Da Vinci Code, and we don't want those books anymore.
Right.
So that's being, having that foresight. And you probably, my guess is you probably weren't sitting here saying, this is ahead of the curve, so I'm going to write it. It's just something that you happen to know about and you're passionate about and you're an expert on. And so it just makes sense rather than being necessarily like so thoughtful about like being ahead of the curve is my guess.
Exactly. And so funny enough, and I'll encourage other people to do this. Actually, I didn't go the traditional route this time. I had this idea. I thought I wanted to write a book called Sustainable Chick. Actually, that was the original title. So I'm going to answer your question now. I thought that was a really cool title.
Yeah.
Sustainable Chick.
Right.
Again, I'm seeing this obviously because I'm in this field. So I'm seeing that the world is moving towards wanting to know about a more natural lifestyle. I'm sorry, we're going to have a lot of cats in here.
You're all good. You're all good.
The world is moving towards this reconnection with the earth. That movement is starting to happen, and that's wonderful. And so I called up a publisher, a girl I had reviewed a few books, and I happened to love this publisher. I loved every book I had reviewed for my blog. And I called up the editor and said, hey, I want to talk to you about a book idea I have.
Wow.
And yeah, so I had no proposal at that time. I had all the thoughts in my head. I knew, and I'm that kind of person. It just kind of goes in a file in my head, and I can pull it out. And okay, I can tell you the table of contents almost of what I want to do. And I had this conversation with her, and she's like, "You've got to be kidding me." She says, "I have this title in my head," because she was running both the nonfiction and the romance departments at this time. So she said, "I've had this title in my head for a long time, called Getting Laid. What do you think about titling the book that?" And it was like kismet, right? It was like, oh my,
that's amazing.
That's crazy. Yeah. So I have to owe it to the editor for the title. But it was not mine.
And I think a great takeaway from that for other writers is, yes, kismet to a degree, but also tenacity and resourcefulness. And I think there are two parts of the writing industry, if you want to call it that. There's, if you're an author, you have to write and you have to produce, but you also have to be part of this business, this publishing industry, and understand that side of it. So, there's some people who write and like, well, the universe will come and somebody will take my manuscript. Well, no,
right.
You need to pick up the phone and call this publisher because you happen to love their books. I mean, that's fantastic. And most people wouldn't do that. In my case, even finding an agent, learning about how do you do that? Well, one of the ways was you go and find books similar to your own in the actual bookstore, and you look at the acknowledgments and see who their agent is. Yeah. And that's how I got my agent eventually. And you just never know what's going to end up being the thing that works, but you have to do all those different things. So you unagented going to an editor and just, sure, there's luck that it was like the best timing ever. But had you not done that, who knows? Who knows? Maybe that book never would have come to light. It certainly wouldn't have been called Getting Laid.
Or it wouldn't have been my book.
It wouldn't have been your book.
Right? She had this title in mind. She was going to find somebody that fit. So I just happened to have everything that she thought, would be a great match to that title. She imagined it would be about chickens. So great. That's key part of the book.
So now you're with this publisher that you respect and love and you think puts out a high quality product. And they're the ones doing the one that just came out as well?
Correct. Yes.
That's fantastic. Congratulations, by the way. I think that came out just last week or so.
Yes.
So that's exciting.
Getting baked.
That's fantastic.
The new one.
Yeah. And so what is, now that you're, and I think a good thing for other writers to know as well is like, you're writing books, but you also have this, big presence, online, and you're producing online. And that's I assume continues to be a major part of, your writing day, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Still running the website. I actually have two websites, but one is much more productive than the other.
Right. And it's interesting to see, like, again, your comment earlier that kind of confounded your expectations of what it means to be a writer, because as a kid, you're thinking, writing books and seeing your books in the bookstore, and then to realize like, oh, I'm actually doing really well online. And of course, as a kid, you wouldn't even know what online was.
Right.
But there are a lot of facets for making money writing. And I think for a lot of successful writers, it's not just one. You are doing multiple different things, whether it's outreach with newsletters or whatever. You're using that skill set to, again, kind of communicate to your readers in different channels. So that's excellent.
Oh, definitely. You have to think outside the box too. And like you said, most of the profit doesn't come from the book itself.
No.
As authors, we know this, unless you are the anomaly, you are the, New York Times bestseller over and over and over again.
Right.
Well, all right. You're probably making a good buck, but the average writer, you're not going to feed your family in a year, most likely. Sometimes you get lucky, you can. And there is that percentage of people that can. So you do have to look for other outlets. I wrote for magazines. I wrote for newspapers. I wrote for online. I wrote for other companies. I ghost wrote for other companies to produce a lot of money. I make income from the blog, from, people paying me to write about their service or product from my perspective and my knowledge and my expertise. Things like that. Obviously, you could do speaking engagements. This is not my favorite, being on video. Like, I really, I'm kind of an introvert by nature, so being on camera at all, like,
well, but you're right though, and I find it fascinating to see like what other things work. So even this interview series that I'm doing, what the genesis of that wasn't like, oh, I'm going to get thousands of subscribers. I mean, I have no idea because it hasn't launched yet. But for me, I find people interesting, so I just want to talk to people. But I also end up meeting a lot of people, and networking is tremendously important for a writer, and knowing, because you never know who is going to think about you at a certain time and say, oh, that person would be good for this, like you said, a speaking engagement, for example. And that speaking engagement might lead to you talking to somebody who all of a sudden, hey, that would make a great movie. And I happen to be a movie producer or whatever. Putting yourself out there is tremendously important. And it's not in the nature for a lot of writers. Like you said, a lot of writers are introverts. But I preach all the time, like, just say yes to any opportunity presented to you, because you don't know, and most of them won't lead to anything, but you never know what's going to happen. So it sounds like you've made a tremendous success kind of doing that, introverted or not. You're saying yes to a lot of different things, and you're you're making yourself vulnerable, and you're putting yourself out there, and it leads to good things. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's like cringeworthy. You just have to say, like, suck it up, buttercup. Just do this.
Right.
It is about the networking. And that's the point. I'm not suggesting that authors should go stalk editors or anything of that nature, but I had a quasi relationship with this person that I called. I didn't just get on the phone and call anybody randomly at this publisher.
But you could have also. I could have. Yeah.
I could have absolutely done that, and it could have worked out exactly the same. But, I did have a knowledge of who this person was. This person knew who I was. Called her up and said, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Because and be prepared. I scripted that ahead of time. Sure. I knew what I wanted to say. It's not like well, Joe.
Right.
I've got this idea bubbling in my head. No, I had notes in front of me.
Of course.
To make sure I said the right thing. So being prepared for that opportunity is also equally important.
Yeah, it's like right. Again, going back to the whole thing of, like, publishing is a business. You're going to treat it like you would if you're going in for a job interview, right? So you're going to be perfect, because even if you have a great idea, if you call that person up and you sound like a scattered dingbat, they're going to be like, is this the person I really want to work with? They have a good idea, but I got to deal with this person. So presentation is super important. I believe that very much so. Well, so we're going to tap into your fiction brain side of your brain a little bit and do a quick storytelling before we wrap up here. This is the part that everybody loves. It's actually a lot of fun. And so a couple key benefits is, because we're recording this, we can edit out any lengthy pauses where we're trying to figure out what the hell to say. And we can keep it short, but it's always interesting to see what energy kind of comes out between me and whomever I'm talking to, and what direction, the story takes. Sometimes it gets very dark very quickly, depending on who I'm talking to. Sometimes it gets very thoughtful. I did one a couple weeks ago with a woman, and we both started talking from a separate point of view, which you really wouldn't do when you're writing it, but telling the story from two different points of view, like, immediately was super fascinating. So you never know what you're going to get. So I'm just going to kind of pick a book back there, and then I'll have you pick a page and a sentence number, and we'll take it from there. So I'll be right back.
All right.
I haven't done a Harlan Coben book yet, but this is The Woods, which I would be lying to say I totally remember reading, but I read it at one point. So pick a number between 1 and 400.
As I say, cool, because I've never read it, so I have no preconceived conception. Let's go with 117.
Okay.
And line 3.
Okay. So I'll read the line, and then give me a sentence or two, whatever you feel like doing. It doesn't have to be just a sentence, and then we'll just kind of alternate, and I'll call it a day at some point. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Can you tell me what this is about, Professor Gold?
I don't remember that day clearly. I don't understand what you're speaking of.
Professor Gold looked down at me like I was a fifth grader. I could tell that I had disappointed him. I had to think up a lie quickly.
Oh, man. I could think of a lie. I'm not a good liar.
It's fiction. It's all lies.
It's true, right? It wasn't my car.
So are you telling me, he said, that the cocaine the cops found in the Chevy wagon didn't belong to you? This is your one opportunity to tell me the truth, because your academic career is at stake.
Oh, for real, it didn't. I was at the bar just minding my own business. And, I didn't even have a drink, barely had a drink. And I went back out to the car and, I started driving and the cops pulled me over. I had no idea. I must have left the doors open.
You're pretty good at lying.
I had to go back to my 19-year-old self.
My nerves were frayed as his gaze bored into mine. I didn't want to be kicked out. If I were to be kicked out, that would be the end of everything. But I couldn't help noticing the small trickle and tickle at the end of my nose. I knew it was going to start bleeding because the cocaine was still in my system.
I quickly looked away, hoping he didn't catch that. I looked down. I didn't know what to say. I just prayed that I could get out of there before that happened, thinking of an excuse, thinking of some way to leave that room.
But he was too smart. He's always been too smart. Look at me, he said. Are you high right now?
Absolutely not. Why would you think that?
The only way I'm going to let you out of this, he said, is if you can do one thing for me.
Anything. I'll do anything. This means so much to me. Just tell me what to do. I was panicking, but I knew that this was my one shot at redemption.
He lightly touched my shoulder with his fingertips. That touch turned into the smallest of squeezes. He looked into my eyes and said, "Can you give me some?" We'll call it there.
It's about where I thought you were going. It was one of two directions.
Yeah. I didn't want to go in the other direction. That was well done. See, it's fun. Tapping into your fiction skills. Well, listen, Barb, what a great pleasure talking to you and to hear more about kind of your story. And I think the listeners will get a lot out of, again, just hearing the breadth of writing that you've done and what that's turned into over time. And I think that's a great lesson for a lot of people who are, trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to be a writer? And it can mean a lot of different things. And in your case, it has manifested itself into many different practices. So, congratulations on your success, and what a great pleasure to finally connect with you.
Thank you. I definitely, wish everybody the best, and, keep writing, write for yourself, because ultimately that's what I did. I wrote because it's within you. Write for yourself. Don't write with the thought of publication. We all want to be published. We all want, because why are we writing?
Right.
We're writing to get a message across. We're writing because we think we have something to say. And we do. We all have something to say. And some of those voices never get heard, and that sucks. But don't let your voice be silenced. Just keep pursuing and pursuing that, inner happiness, even if it's just your next door neighbor that's reading your stuff or your reading group. Someone's benefiting. Someone's getting something out of your voice, your perspective, your view of the world. Yeah,
very well said. Well, thanks for everything, and good luck with your new release. I'm excited for you.
Thank you so much. This was fun. I'm glad we got to connect.
Me as well. All right. Take care, Barb.
You too.
Bye. that was my conversation with Barb. I think it went really well. It was very interesting to get to know her a little bit better and understand about her passions and her road to publication. So if you want to know more about Barb, you can go visit her at ruralmom.com. And if you want to know more about me or subscribe to my newsletter or read some of my musings or know more about my books, you can just go to carterwilson.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. New episodes of Making It Up will be out again soon. Until then, take care.